Crocodiles are making their way into Central Florida, and after a pet dog was attacked and killed on Monday.
Central Florida, a large crocodile was spotted swimming in a canal.
Crocodile is on the move once again in Brevard County.
Something extremely strange is driving Florida's crocodiles out of the water in numbers wildlife officials have never seen before. They have lived along these coastlines for millions of years, but now they are fleeing into canals, backyards, and storm drains. The water looks the same. The temperature feels the same, but something is deeply wrong. Each time scientists test the water, the results come back worse. Now they believe something is hiding in those waters, and the crocodiles are not the only ones in danger. An endangered species. Before humans ever set foot in Florida, the American crocodile owned the coastline. They basked on mangrove shores from the southern tip of the peninsula all the way down through the Florida Keys. Scientists estimate that their population may have numbered between 2,000 and 3,000 individuals, a stable presence at the top of the coastal food chain. They were here long before the Spanish arrived, long before Miami existed, and long before anyone thought to drain the Everglades or build condominiums on the water. However, things began to go wrong in the 20th century. When development spread across South Florida, canals were cut, mangroves were cleared, and cities expanded toward the water. But the real problem wasn't just the loss of their habitat. At the same time, hunters realized crocodile skin could be used to make leather handbags, shoes, and belts. So they shot them by the hundreds, often leaving the carcasses where they fell. There were no laws stopping them, and no limits on how many they could take. Before long, the population collapsed, and by the middle of the century, the crocodiles that had ruled Florida's coastlines for millennia had been reduced to a fraction of what they once were. During the annual nesting season,
take a look at that. He's the big fella, sitting out in the middle of the river.
When female crocodiles build nests and lay their eggs, nest numbers that should have been in the hundreds dropped sharply to just 10 or 20 nests across the entire state. The few remaining nesting females, which are crucial for the survival of the species, were forced into a small area in northeastern Florida Bay. In fact, at some point, there were fewer than 20 breeding females left. Finally, in 1975, the federal government stepped in. The American crocodile was placed on the endangered species list, and at the time of that listing, biologists estimated the total population at fewer than 300 crocodiles across the entire space. They were right on the edge of disappearing from Florida entirely. In a bid to save them, three things happened. First, the federal government made it illegal to hunt them. You could no longer shoot a crocodile for its hide without facing serious consequences, and this stopped the killing almost overnight.
50 years ago, crocodiles were hunted almost to the point of disappearing, so the government outlawed killing them for sport or profit.
Second, the government designated protected areas where the crocodiles could live without the threat of development. Everglades National Park became a sanctuary. Biscayne Bay and the Florida Keys also got protected status. And Crocodile Lake National Wildlife Refuge was created specifically to give them a place to nest. Even the canal system at the Turkey Point nuclear power plant turned into an unexpected refuge, with warm water discharges creating ideal conditions for breeding. Another conservation effort the government made was embarking on major habitat restoration projects across South Florida. Water that had been diverted for farming and development started flowing back into the Everglades. Mangroves that had been torn out were replanted. The coastline slowly began returning to something resembling what it had been before the bulldozers arrived. The recovery took decades, but it worked. By 1999, the population had climbed back to between 500 and 1,000 individuals. Nesting females, which had bottomed out at 20, increased steadily, and by 2005, there were 85 breeding females spread across protected areas. On March 20th, 2007, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service officially changed the crocodile's status from endangered to threatened. It was a conservation success story, one of the few that actually worked. Today, the Florida population is estimated at between 1,500 and 2,000 adult crocodiles, not counting the young ones born each year.
This is one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had with an animal, let alone a crocodile, deep in Cape York.
But now, something is deeply wrong. In the past several years, wildlife officials have noticed a strange pattern. Crocodiles are leaving their traditional ranges. They are showing up in places they have never been seen before, like canals, suburban ponds, and retention basins behind shopping centers, places that are not safe for crocodiles or for the people who live nearby. This is not normal behavior. Crocodiles are territorial animals. They do not abandon established habitats without a reason. Something is making the water they have lived in for thousands of years unlivable. A few researchers have raised the possibility that something must be happening deep in the Everglades. But it's not just about the crocodiles, because if something in the water is dangerous enough to drive them out, that same thing could affect fish, birds, marine mammals, and eventually humans. The toxic chemistry, driving crocodiles out. Florida's waters are sick, and that's a fact backed by thousands of pages of data collected over decades. The same waters where crocodiles have lived for millions of years are now laced with chemicals that should not be there, and the animals are starting to leave. In the spring of 2025, the Tampa Bay Times published an investigation that shocked even the scientists who study Florida's waterways. Nearly 1 in 4 waterways across the state showed signs of contamination from nitrogen and phosphorus. These are nutrients that sound harmless, but are not when they end up in the wrong places. The problem is, Florida sits on top of a massive aquifer, a natural underground water source that feeds the springs and rivers across the state. In 2016, the state government passed a law called the Florida Springs and Aquifer Protection Act. It designated 30 springs as outstanding Florida springs, meaning they were considered special enough to deserve extra protection. At the time that law passed, 24 of those 30 springs were already polluted with high levels of nitrates. And by 2025, the situation had gotten much worse. 28 of those 30 protected springs were now polluted. Most people don't realize that the pollution comes from dairy cows. A single cow puts out about 300 pounds of nitrogen every year just from its manure and urine. This means that one cow creates roughly the same amount of waste as 30 human beings. Florida has thousands of dairy cows, and unlike human waste, which goes through treatment plants before it is released, dairy waste gets collected in large lagoons mixed with groundwater and then sprayed onto fields as liquid manure. That liquid soaks into the ground and travels straight down into the aquifer. The numbers are startling. In North Florida, where most of the dairy cows are located, the groundwater pollution from nitrates is 10 to 30 times higher than the state says is safe. This means every time someone drinks well water in those areas, or every time that groundwater flows into a spring or river, the water carries far more nitrogen than it should. This is not just an environmental problem, it is also a human health problem. When nitrates get into drinking water at high levels, they can cause a condition called blue baby syndrome. Infants who drink water with too many nitrates cannot get enough oxygen in their blood. Their skin turns blue, and in severe cases, they can die. Scientists are also finding links between nitrates in drinking water and cancer. In North Florida, counties with the most dairy cows and the highest nitrate levels in drinking water, doctors are seeing more cases of colorectal cancer than in other parts of the state. But cows are not the only problem. Florida has about 2.7 million septic tanks buried in backyards across the state. Roughly half of them are more than 30 years old. About 1 in 10 is actively failing. That means raw sewage is leaking into the ground and making its way into the water. There is no law in Florida requiring homeowners to have their septic tanks inspected after they are installed. So many of these failing tanks go unnoticed for years. Even the water that goes through treatment plants is not clean enough. Most wastewater treatment facilities only remove about 10% of the harmful contaminants before dumping the rest back into rivers and canals. This means at the end of the day, treated sewage is still sewage. It still carries nitrogen and phosphorus and chemicals that do not belong in natural waterways. In 2025, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection made a shocking announcement. To make the water safe again, they said, farms and communities need to reduce the amount of nitrogen going into the ground by more than 40 million pounds every year. But nitrogen pollution is just one part of the problem. Florida's waterways are also dealing with something called a salinity shift. Salinity is just a fancy word for how much salt is in the water. Some parts of Florida's coast need a mix of fresh water and salt water to stay healthy. Too much fresh water and the saltwater animals die. Too much salt water and the freshwater animals die. In recent years, the swings have gotten extreme. At the Ortega River in Jacksonville, monitors recorded that the water sometimes had about 20 units of salt in every 1,000 parts of water, and other days it had none at all. This means the river went from salty as the ocean to completely fresh, and back again in a matter of months. Nothing that lives in the water can survive swings like that, not even the crocodiles. The Army Corps of Engineers spends millions of dollars trying to manage this problem. They release fresh water from reservoirs to push back the salt water when it gets too high. But they are fighting a losing battle. The balance is constantly shifting, and no one knows how to stop it. But the salt issue isn't their only problem, because there are chemicals that should not even exist at all. Scientists testing fish in Old Tampa Bay found something alarming. Catfish, ladyfish, and jack crevalle had high concentrations of a harmful chemical called PFAS in their bodies. These chemicals are used in non-stick pans, waterproof clothing, and firefighting foam. They do not break down in the environment. They build up in animals and humans over time. Based on these levels, the state has issued guidelines telling people how much fish they can safely eat. For some species, the recommendation is almost none. Researchers have noticed a striking pattern. If you map where PFAS contamination is worst in Florida, and then map where wastewater spills have happened, the two maps look almost identical. This means that the chemicals are getting into the water through leaking pipes and broken treatment plants. But the most disturbing piece of this puzzle is the growth of the dangerous blue-green algae. When water gets too much nitrogen and phosphorus, algae blooms explode across lakes and rivers. These blooms are ugly, they smell bad, and they even kill fish. But what scientists are learning about what happens inside those blooms is far more alarming. Blue-green algae produces a toxin called BMAA. Researchers have linked BMAA to neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. In September 2025, scientists published a study that should have made headlines everywhere. They examined the brains of dolphins that had washed up dead in Florida's Indian River Lagoon. Those dolphins had been swimming in water filled with blue-green algae blooms, and their brains also showed the same damage seen in human Alzheimer's patients. The scientists who did this study said something that should keep every Floridian awake at night. Dolphins are the canary in the coal mine. If algae toxins are destroying their brains, what are those same toxins doing to humans who drink the water, swim in the water, or eat the fish that live in it? Unlike other toxins, which make people cough and choke immediately, the damage from blue-green algae happens slowly. It builds up over years and even decades. By the time someone gets sick, the damage is already done. There is a term scientists use to explain why all of this is happening without anyone seeming to notice or care. They call it shifting baseline syndrome. Each generation grows up thinking the water they see is normal. A person born in 1990 thinks the springs they swam in as a child were clean, but their parents remember the springs being clearer. Their grandparents remember them being crystal. And the people who came before that remember water so pure you could see 20 feet to the bottom, as if looking through glass. Back in 1832, the famous naturalist John James Audubon visited Salt Springs and decided to write about it. He said that the water was so clear he could see fish 20 or 30 feet below the surface as though they were within arm's reach. No one can say that about Salt Springs today. Each generation accepts a slightly more degraded world as normal, and so the pollution gets worse. The water gets dirtier, the animals get sicker, and the crocodiles start to leave. But the polluted water isn't the only thing driving the crocodiles out. There's something else going on, something no amount of clean water laws can fix. It's not just pushing crocodiles out of Florida, but rewriting the rules for every living thing along the coast. Is climate change the culprit? Scientists who study crocodiles in Florida have noticed something extremely worrying over the past decade. After 50 years of watching crocodile populations recover, the growth is finally slowing down. In fact, in some places, the population has stopped growing altogether. Around Key Largo, the number of crocodile nests used to go up every year. However, about 10 years ago, that number stopped increasing and has now begun to drop. The researchers from the University of Florida who track these nests began to investigate the possible cause, and what they found was alarming. The water levels are rising. The islands where crocodiles have nested for generations are slowly being covered by the sea. Year by year, the high tide reaches a little higher. The nests that used to stay dry now get flooded. The eggs are dying, and the crocodiles are left with no choice but to move out and not come back. In Florida Bay, the situation is much worse. Before all the development and the roads and the canals, Northeast Florida Bay was some of the best crocodile nesting territory in the state. But the water was diverted for farming and for the growing cities. Fresh water stopped flowing the way it used to, and the bay got saltier. And just like that, the crocodiles left. Scientists have run projections for what the future holds, and the results are disturbing. Depending on how fast the sea rises, between 30% and 98% of the places where crocodiles live now will be underwater. Even a 1-meter rise, which scientists believe is the best-case scenario, would wipe out 90% of their nesting habitat. This means the waters these crocodiles have used for generations will simply be gone. The land where crocodiles live in Florida is mostly protected. It sits inside Everglades National Park and other wildlife refuges. But the ocean does not care about park boundaries. Water rises the same everywhere. And as the crocodiles lose ground in the south, they cannot simply move north. Between them and any new habitat stand the cities of Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and Naples. There would be no path for them to follow the coastline as it changes. But the rising sea levels aren't the only climate change problem facing the crocodiles. When Hurricane Ian hit Florida in September 2022, the storm surge pushed nearly 3 feet of water into Key Largo streets.
Thinking of the millions in the path of this hurricane, the Category 4 hurricane slamming into Florida's southwest coast this afternoon.
Crocodiles that usually spent their days lounging on boat ramps were suddenly swimming down residential roads. It took nearly 2 weeks for the flooding to recede. And in those 2 weeks, crocodiles were in places they do not belong, stressed and displaced, searching for higher ground that does not exist. But rising water and stronger storms are not the only problems. While the overall climate is warming, Florida still gets cold snaps, and crocodiles do not handle cold well. Alligators can survive freezing temperatures by poking their noses above the ice and going into a kind of hibernation. Crocodiles cannot do that. When it gets too cold, they die. One of the most devastating examples of how this happens was the Florida freeze of 2010. That event killed American crocodiles, manatees, thousands of fish, and anywhere from 50 to 90% of the invasive pythons living in some areas. A marine biologist described it as the single most devastating thing he had ever seen in the marine environment. All the corals died in shallow water, and dead fish were everywhere. What made 2010 so deadly was not just how cold it got, but how long it lasted. Nearly 2 weeks of freezing temperatures. A cold snap has happened this year, but it only lasted 2 or 3 days, not long enough to kill the crocodiles. If another long freeze hits, the same thing could happen again. And a population already stressed by warming temperatures, rising seas, and lost habitat may not bounce back a second time. Climate change is not the only thing pushing them out. There is something else swimming in Florida's waters. Something that was not here 50 years ago. Something that sees a baby crocodile as lunch. The new predators hunting the crocodiles. One of the major invaders now threatening the American crocodiles is the Burmese python. These predators were confirmed in southern Florida as early as 1979. People brought them in as pets. They bought them from exotic animal dealers, kept them in tanks, and when the snakes got too big, too hard to feed, and too dangerous to handle, they let them go. Between 1996 and 2006 alone, more than 99,000 pythons were imported into the United States before the government tightened the rules. But by then, it was already too late. Today, Burmese pythons occupy more than 1,000 square miles of South Florida. They have spread from coast to coast across Everglades National Park and Biscayne National Park. There is no fence that stops them, no barrier that holds them back. They are everywhere. The damage they have done to native wildlife is staggering. In areas where pythons have taken over, foxes are nearly gone, and marsh rabbits are almost impossible to find. Bobcats, opossums, and raccoons have been wiped out across huge stretches of the Everglades. These are the animals that used to fill the swamp. They are the food that crocodiles and alligators and every other predator depended on. Now they are gone. But pythons do not just eat the food. They also eat the crocodiles. In 2005, researchers in the Everglades found something that shocked them. A Burmese python had eaten an entire American alligator.
They show the moment a python swallowed a crocodile whole. Crocodile, obviously larger than the snake.
The snake's body was found with the alligator inside its stomach. If a python can kill an alligator, it can certainly kill a young crocodile. The adults might be safe for now. But the babies? They are exactly the right size for a hungry python. Scientists have documented that pythons raid crocodile nests. They crawl in while the mother is away and swallow every egg. And with so many pythons in the swamp, the odds of a nest surviving to hatching get lower every year. The pythons are also competing for food. As they eat up all the small mammals and birds and reptiles, there is less left for the native predators. The crocodiles that survive to adulthood find less to eat. The ones that are still young find almost nothing. What makes this worse is that pythons used to be limited by cold weather. A hard freeze could kill them, but as temperatures rise, the number of freezing nights in Florida is dropping. The pythons are expanding north and moving into new areas, and the crocodiles have nowhere to go. But the pythons are not the only invaders. There is another predator in Florida's waters that might be even more dangerous to young crocodiles. It is called the Nile monitor. Nile monitors are large lizards native to Africa. They grow several feet long. They have sharp claws, powerful jaws, and a muscular tail they can whip like a club. Snake hunters who chase them describe them as modern-day velociraptors. They can swim, burrow, climb trees, and are nearly impossible to catch. Nile monitors were first brought to Florida about 40 years before the state finally put them on the prohibited species list in 2021. That means they had 4 decades to spread, breed, and get comfortable. Now they are breeding in the wild across 4 South Florida counties: Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, and Lee. Nile monitors eat turtles, snakes, birds, small mammals, and, of course, young crocodiles. They hunt in the same waters where crocodiles raise their babies and raid their nests. They are faster than a hatchling crocodile, more aggressive, and better adapted to hunting in the shallows. A Nile monitor can clear out a nest before the mother crocodile even knows something is wrong. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission now classifies Nile monitors as a high priority for removal, but removing them is almost impossible. But the most frightening invader has not yet taken hold. Scientists have confirmed that at least 3 Nile crocodiles have been captured in South Florida since 2000. One was found in the Everglades. Another was found on a house porch in Miami. DNA analysis proved they were real Nile crocodiles, the same species that kills hundreds of people in Africa every year. Between 2010 and 2014 alone, Nile crocodiles were responsible for 480 attacks on humans and 123 deaths. One of the juveniles captured in Florida grew nearly 28% faster than wild Nile crocodiles from their native range. That means Florida is not just a place where they can survive. It is a place where they can thrive. The scientists who analyzed these animals warned that Florida's Atlantic coast and the entire Gulf of Mexico coastline provide a favorable climate for the species to establish itself. If Nile crocodiles get established in Florida, they will be at the top of the food chain. They would eat native birds, fish, and mammals. They would also eat the American crocodiles and add a new apex predator to an ecosystem that is already stretched to its limit. There is one more thing driving the crocodiles out of Florida's waters. It is the thing that introduced all these invaders in the first place. The thing that changed the water, raised the temperature, and turned the swamp into a battleground. The unexplained disturbance, humans. There is one predator that no scientist can relocate, no law can control, and no fence can keep out. This predator is the one driving crocodiles out of their last remaining habitats faster than any python or rising tide. This predator is people. Since the 1970s, both the human population of Florida and the crocodile population have grown at the same time. More people moved to South Florida, while more crocodiles recovered from the brink of extinction. For a while, they managed to stay out of each other's way. But over the past 15 years, that has changed drastically. People have started building homes directly in the places where crocodiles have always lived: the Keys, the coastlines, and the canals. All the places that used to belong to the crocodiles are now split between them and the people who moved in. The canals that cut through South Florida suburbs were not built for crocodiles. They were built to drain water away from neighborhoods and roads. But crocodiles figured out something useful. Those canals connect everything. A crocodile can swim from the Everglades into a suburban neighborhood in just a few days. The same water that runs behind shopping centers and houses is the same water that flows through the wild parts of the park. So a crocodile does not see a difference between wilderness and your backyard. To them, it is all one connected road. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission tracks crocodiles with GPS tags. And what they have learned is surprising. Crocodiles do not stay in the wilderness. They move back and forth. They appear in a suburban canal one morning, and 3 days later, they are back in Everglades National Park. They do not see the difference between protected land and a backyard. To them, water is water. When a crocodile shows up somewhere it should not be, wildlife officials used to catch it and move it far away. They thought if they put it far enough, it would stay gone. However, that strategy does not work because crocodiles are known to return to their original territories through canals and swamps. This means you cannot move them. They will simply come back. Sometimes, though, there is no choice but to remove a crocodile. In October 2025, a crocodile in Brevard County killed a dog near an elementary school. Wildlife officials said the animal showed zero fear of humans. That is the danger sign. A crocodile that is afraid of people will usually stay away, but a crocodile that is not afraid will keep coming back. Officials later admitted that the animal was placed into permanent captivity, never to be released again. Another unusual reason crocodiles may be migrating inland could be for dogs. Crocodiles see dogs as prey. In 2012, a 65-pound dog was killed in Key Largo. In 2015, a 25-pound pit bull mix was killed on a Key Biscayne golf course. These are not small incidents. When a crocodile kills a pet, it changes how the community sees the animals living in their midst. Fear rises, and calls for removal increase. Surprisingly, for all the crocodiles living in Florida, there have only been 2 documented crocodile bites to humans in recent history. One happened in 2014, when a group of people were swimming in a canal at 2:30 in the morning. The other happened in March 2024, when a man fell off his sailboat in Flamingo and a crocodile bit him. 2 bites in decades is a record of restraint that no other large predator anywhere in the world can match. Right now, researchers strongly believe that if crocodiles are to continue to recover, coexistence with humans will eventually be necessary. There is no other option. The Everglades are too small, the Keys are too crowded, and the crocodiles have nowhere else to go. So the question is not whether crocodiles will live alongside people. It's whether people will learn to live alongside crocodiles. Do you think humans and crocodiles can live alongside each other? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.